Right. Well, I'm going to talk about Grade 1 listed buildings in Manchester. Now, I was going to do it about the Grade 1 listing buildings in Greater Manchester, but I only managed to get through 3 of them by the time I'd finished this. So I just concentrated on those, because it's better to do ones in depth rather than just a skim over everything. But altogether in Manchester, in Greater Manchester, there are 48 Grade 1 listed buildings.
Gosh.
Of which 15 are in Manchester. And there's one borough that hasn't got any. Does anybody name that borough?
Is it Tameside?
No.
Is it Salford?
No.
Yeah.
No, it's Oldham.
Oh.
So pull your socks up, Oldham, and do something about it. That's all I can say. But anyway, a Grade 1 structures, and not all buildings, structures, are those considered to be buildings of exceptional interest, which of course is a personal view, isn't it, of things. And most of the Grade 1 listed buildings have a municipal, ecclesiastic, or other cultural heritage. That's the ones that seem to have kind of stuck. The oldest Grade 1 listed structure in Greater Manchester is the Parish Church of St. Mary the Virgin in Eccles. Has anybody ever been there? I didn't even. I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
But apparently it was completed in the 13th century, but greatly expanded since then. Of the others, there are quite a lot of manor houses that are listed, 8 of them, the earliest of which date from the 14th century, which is Wardley Hall, which is still the residence of the Roman Catholic Bishop of Salford, and in it has got the preserved skull of St. Ambrose Barlow, who has connections to Chorlton as well, but I won't go into that. And he's one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales, and he's displayed in a niche at the top of the main staircase. Well, there you go. The 40 martyrs, any of you brought up as a Catholic will remember them. We only studied Catholic martyrs. There weren't any Protestant martyrs, apparently. Well, they weren't in high school. Of course there were, because Elizabeth's sister, Mary, managed to get burned quite a few. Anyway, coming on to Manchester's Grade 1 listed buildings. I'm going to look at these 3 mainly, and also the Town Hall as well on top of that. I thought I'd put it in context of the Albert Square plans, because anybody who's come in the tram past the Town Hall sees it's all sort of blocked off. And there have been works going on there for at least 2, maybe 3 years. But this is how it will look. What do you think of it?
Well, it's not a lot different.
No, it isn't. Well, they're enlarged the square by about 20%.
Could have had a lot more foliage.
Yeah, true. But the extra space was created by pedestrianising the roads around the square, with only Princess Street, where you can see the tram on the left, remaining open to traffic. I think that's really good, because it does give a bigger space, and you haven't got the noise and fumes of traffic going right round it, which has been before. So that's an improvement. But I don't think it looks particularly great from that angle of it. This one's perhaps a bit better. One of the things that they said they've done is to improve access to the Town Hall's main entrance for the first time by having it. They've got a slope going up to it rather than those steps, which reminds me of demonstrations I used to go on with disabled people in the 1980s, where we complained about the lack of any access to the Town Hall, except for certainly anybody with mobility impairment. And we were told it's a Grade 1 listed building, you can't do it. Well, we disputed that. And eventually, well, we did a demonstration at the side entrance to the Town Hall. We did a demonstration when they were having a meeting of anti-apartheid, and our banners on it said "Apartheid for disabled people." That really got them upset. Having to carry people up the steps and things like this. But soon after, they agreed to get a ramp installed at the side entrance which most people use to the town hall. But having the front entrance actually accessible and usable will be really good. I think that's as it should be. So it's improving safety, better lighting, and a tranquil space around the fountain. But the thing I thought, if you see that bicycle, does that mean bikes are going to be able to wander across any part of this? In which case, it's not exactly very safe, is it? There should be a designated lane for them, I'd have thought. But there you go.
Not the way
I
some
thought
of them.
that it's tricky enough with all the cyclists going down the tram tracks. They seem to appear out of nowhere.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
When you're crossing.
They do. So anyway, it's supposed to end in June 2024, but I don't think it will. So this is the Albert Memorial, which was designed by Thomas Worthington. Designed it, and it was built between 1862 and 65. And Manchester Corporation Monuments Committee, which they had. That's a good one. I probably haven't got one of those still. They wanted to erect a memorial to Princess Albert, who died of typhoid in 1861. And after looking at various options, they decided to erect a statue in a decorated canopy. It won a lot of support. There was something called the Manchester Bricklayers Protection Society, which I don't know, what is that? Protecting
From what?
brick makers? Well, interestingly, this was at the period when they were still using handmade bricks rather than industrial bricks, and there was some Luddite behaviour in Manchester later on when the industrial bricks started taking over in the 1880s. And look at some of the older buildings, you notice that they're not exactly straight, the bricks, and they occasionally then have a course where they bring them all straight again. Anyway, that's something in itself. They donated 50,000 bricks, which apparently was only enough for the base when they did it.
Okay.
So it's as an expression of sympathy towards our beloved Queen. So they found all sorts of construction problems. It was found to be riddled with drains and culverts. So a further public subscription was launched in 1865, and they raised an extra £6,500, in spite of the hardships caused by the cotton famine that was on at the time. Clearing the site began in 1864 and required the demolition of over 100 buildings, including the Engravers Arms pub, a coffee roasting works, that's an original one, a smithy, a coal yard, and various warehouses. The project was encouraged by this is what it says, by the visit of the Prince and Princess of Wales to open the Albert Monument in 1869. Not the Queen. I don't know whether she was in mourning at the time still, but it is interesting that when Manchester Town Hall was opened a few years later in 1877, she refused to come to the opening. I'll come on to that. So anyway, that's the Albert Memorial. Does everybody like it? It seems to me fairly similar to the Albert Memorial in London, except smaller. But it's not. I don't particularly like it, but it is a kind of fixture, isn't it? You know it. If you're saying, "Well, we'll meet by the Albert Memorial," you know where you're going. So I think through familiarity, it seems okay. But to me, it's nothing hugely special. It's probably its historical significance more than its artistic.
Yeah.
But this is quite a well-known painting by Adolphe. Not a great name to have, never mind. Adolphe Valette, who was a French painter who came over to and taught at the Manchester School of Art. And one of his pupils, of course, famous Lancashire one, Manchester one, L.S. Lowry. But you can see the Albert Memorial there, can't you?
Yes.
It reminds me, that picture, of being a child with all the fog and the smoke and the atmosphere is lovely, isn't it?
Well, and you also all the buildings were black. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but all the trees were black. When I was a kid, you go climbing a tree in Manchester and you'd come absolutely covered in sort of soot and stuff. In fact, only when I went out into the country, I realised trees had different colours and black bark. There you go.
I remember once we set out in my dad's car to go to the pantomime at the Palace Theatre or somewhere, and we had to turn back because of the smog, because my dad couldn't see, you know, to drive, and we were full crying in the back of the car having to go back home. Yeah.
Yes, I remember we used to quite enjoy the smogs. We put a scarf around our face and we'd get off school early. That was the main thing we liked. But I remember liking about it. Anyway, that's a painting by Villette. Here is Manchester Town Hall, which is 85 meters tall and was the tallest building in Manchester for quite a while. It's regarded as a great interpretation of the Gothic revival architecture. And it houses, I've talked about this before, Great Abel, which was named after Abel Hayward, who was the Lord Mayor at the time. A very interesting character. And in fact, the reason that Queen Victoria didn't want to, this is according to an article in The Guardian, didn't refuse to come to open the town hall was because she thought he was too radical, because he was a Chartist. So instead, they had a procession of all the trades and the trade unions, the emerging trade unions, and there were 50,000 different trade unionists marched around the town hall at the opening, including the bakers who had an 8-foot loaf that they'd baked. Which sounds interesting. No pictures remain of that.
Not a lot changes.
Yeah, yes, indeed. It was designed by Alfred Waterhouse and was completed in 1877. In the early 1970s, do you remember this? There was a plan to build an underground station under Albert Square and neighbouring Peter Square as part of the ill-fated Pick-Vic Tunnel project.
Well,
Project eventually cancelled and the station was not built. Do anybody? I remember that. The idea of having an underground railway between the two railway stations. There you go. Maybe a bit further as well. It didn't happen. Now, the current town hall restoration is going to cost it at the moment as 325 million, which is a hell of a lot for one building, isn't it? And it's going to go over budget because of the rising costs of problems with the restoration. So currently they're expecting it to need an extra 17 million. And it will be delayed from the June 2024 opening that they were hoping on. But the good thing about it, 45% of the workforce employed is local in doing all this, which is good. And they've created an extra 237 new jobs, as well as 123 apprenticeships and work placements as well. So, you know, it's costly, but it's being done with, at least with that in mind. Anyway, that's Manchester Town Hall.
Oh, that's Chetham's.
The oldest free public reference library in the English-speaking world. It's actually
Amazing.
Chetham's Hospital and attached wall. That's the grade 1 listed bit of it. It's got a very interesting history. Well, it's like with a lot of these things, you think, oh, it's probably straightforward, and then it isn't when you go and examine it. It was established in 1442, and it contains both the library and the Chetham's School of Music, which was established much later in 1653. And it was established under the will of Humphrey Chetham for the education of the sons of honest, industrial and painful parents. That's quite young, certainly under about 12, I think. And a library for the use of scholars. The library has been in continuous use since 1653. I'm very ashamed to say this. I've never actually been round Chetham's library. And I was thinking that some of these things, they would, you know, they'd do tours of it. So you have somebody showing you around. If anybody's interested in doing something like that, might be a good trip out for us.
Oh, I'd like.
Good. Yes, I'd like it too.
I'd like that.
Yep. They're bookable via the library's website. So we'll think about that one anyway. It's a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been inside and it's got a lovely feeling.
Yeah, well, yeah, I imagine it has. I'd be very interested to see it. Anyway, there's a bit more to it than that. This is the Baronial Hall, 15th century Baronial Hall next to the library. I think it was the centre of medieval Manchester, stood on a sandstone bluff at the confluence of the rivers Irwell and Irk. The rector in 1421, Lord of the Manor, obtained a license from Henry V. He donated his manor house for the use as a college of priest buildings for the collegiate church, which later to become the cathedral. This is Humphrey Chetham, 1580 to 1653, by an unknown artist. Doesn't look like a very sympathetic individual, but maybe that was the artist. I don't know. He was unmarried and a childless financier, philanthropist, and cloth merchant. And he provided £8,000 for the maintenance and education of 14 poor boys from Manchester and 6 from Salford and 2 from Droylsden.
Oh, yeah.
This continued right through until the Second World War, when the boys were evacuated to the seaside town of Cleveland. And it was decided when they came back that they were going to make it into a grammar school. And that took place in 1950 after they come back. And it was amalgamated with Eccles Hospital School in Ardwick, which had been established in the 19th century. So this is I think the Millgate Building. And it is a former Manchester Grammar School and became part of Chetham's in 1978. It currently accommodates most of the teaching space and is a Grade 2 listed building. So it's got a very good reputation for music. And by that, they decided to become a co-educational, i.e. have girls there, music school in 1969. It's now in yeah, go on, Jackie.
My niece went there, and 2 of my nephews, and they all joined the military afterwards, and they play in the military bands. And she rides a horse, and they're all brass. They all play brass instruments.
That's unusual, isn't it? Both joining the army.
3 of them, yeah, and they're all in military bands.
It's now in the independent sector, so it was privatized. Now this I think is the interesting. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
2013 sexual abuse scandal.
No.
I won't go into great detail on this, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning in passing because I think it's happened in a lot of independent schools, especially during post-World War II. Michael Brewer, who's director of music from late 70s to the early 90s, and his ex-wife were convicted of indecently assaulting a pupil, Francis Andrade, between 78 and 82. He was jailed for 6 years, and Andrade committed suicide after giving evidence at the trial. And then Malcolm Layfield, who then became on to become head of strings at the Royal Northern College of Music, had to resign after claims of his previous sexual misconduct were brought up during the Brewer hearing. So they knew he'd been accused of these various things, but the RNCM, who've got a very close relationship with Chetham's, understandably because of the music, still went ahead and appointed him. Then there was somebody called Christopher Ling, a violin tutor employed by Brewer, abused pupils in his care between ages of 9 and 15 in the 80s. He apparently he'd moved to Los Angeles and shot himself dead in 2015 after police arrived at his home to arrest him.
Oh dear.
There was an independent inquiry to this, and in its 19th report in March of this year mentioned that the school's image seemed to be more important than the victims. That's why they took such a long time to address the issue. Quote, in some cases, it was clear that protecting the reputation of the school was prioritized over the protection of children from sexual abuse. So it doesn't come out at all well. Though to be fair on them, the current management seems to have a very robust attitude towards it, but it's a lot of people's lives were ruined by that sort of thing. And it happened at the school that I went to as well.
Bernard, I think it's fair to say that you know, I worked with Michael Brewer and
Oh,
Malcolm
right.
Layfield, and knew them all very, very well, especially Layfield, who now lives in France. Fantastic fiddle player, violinist, etc. But the result of this, and there were 16 other people who were named, and it doesn't just from Manchester, it hit the Royal College of Music, in fact to all institutions. But the good thing that it did, it made people finish this ridiculous nonsense of, oh well, you know, you've just got to accept that if you've got one-to-one things going on.
Yeah.
And that's not right. It was individuals taking advantage of the fact that a lot of young people looked up to these individuals as brilliant musicians, but they took that their power beyond, and it's honestly it's very uncomfortable within the music fraternity, this whole process. And there's knock-on effects going on today. But Chet's is worldwide in terms of music.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, let's move on from that, which is a rather depressing topic, and move on to Manchester Cathedral. This was a picture taken in 1920. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We're running out of time. But you can see, I can remember something fairly similar to that when I was young, with that, especially with that walkway up to the exchange station. Do you remember on the left?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was quite elegant in that setting, personally. I thought it's better than it is now.
Me too.
Yeah, and this
I thought it was great having all those stations. There was three stations I could go to Liverpool from. You can't have too many ways of getting out of Manchester.
maybe that's why they closed some. The formal name of the cathedral is the Cathedral and Collegiate Church of St. Mary, St. Denis, and St. George. And it's always been associated with Chethams since its beginning, and the school was built as accommodation for its priests, choristers, and clerks. So it's like a lot of these old buildings are a bit like George Washington's axe. That is, you replace the blade, and then later on you replace the handle, and it's still his axe. Well, it isn't entirely the same object, is it? And I think with the cathedral, there have been a whole series of additions, renovations, alterations, and then especially during the war, there was damage from that. During the war, this was a Second World War. This was used as an air raid shelter in the cathedral. And you can see here the damage just nearby the cathedral, because you can see it on the left. This was during the air raids in January 1941. The Christmas ones, as were known in Manchester, the biggest bombings that there were. This is really interesting. The Reverend Joshua Jotty Brooks, who, very interesting guy. It's in the early 19th century, it was the only place in Manchester where marriage may be legally contracted and fees of 3 shillings and 6 paid to the collegiate church. So Joshua Brooks developed a production line method of the actual weddings. And in 1821, there was a total of 1,924 marriages were solemnized in the collegiate church in batches of 20 or more. The groom and friends would decamp to a nearby alehouse. The bride kept place in the queue, a bit like queuing for the funeral, isn't it? But if there was one groom too few when a group of couples were lined up in front of the altar, Brooks notoriously would countenance no delay, but continue the marriage with any passerby or even one of the other grooms as a proxy stand-in. Brooks is commonly reckoned to have conducted more marriages, funerals, and christenings than any English clergyman before or since. This is some of the replacement stained glass. This one I particularly like, which is by Margaret Traherne in 1966, which is, I think, looks really, really beautiful. And then moving swiftly on, this is the Hanging Bridge, 1892 excavation and modern view. Originally, it was closed when it became an insanitary open sewer. Originally, it was a stream that flowed through the ditch from the Irk to the Irwell, possibly the lost River Dean, which gave its name to Deansgate. But in 1600, it was condemned as being an open sewer and was built over. More than 100 years later, it was uncovered again following restoration work and went on display. And a lot of people, several thousand people paid to have a look at it in Victorian times. It's only available now, and there it is, from the 1890 when they had the available to look at. And this is the only view of it you can get now, which is from the Cathedral's visiting centre. And the bridge itself is listed as a scheduled ancient monument, which you can't do any changes to it. It looks like they've converted underneath it to like a meeting room, which is interesting. But it again, I knew of Hanging Ditch, though its name doesn't come from hanging. It was from the Old English hen, meaning wild bird, and the Welsh gan, meaning between two hills. So it's hen gan, hanging, not because there were hanging people there, which is what I thought. I think we all did. And I don't think there's time for this. We'll be cut off, but I'm going for it anyway. This is Manchester Cathedral's famous misericords. It's got the largest number of misericords in the country.